What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to Raytheon whistleblower, former Navy firefighter and contractor for Raytheon, Stargate project and MKUltra survivor, travel lover, and a man on a mission to help circumnavigate the gatekeepers of the quote-unquote disclosure commodity market, Eric Hecker. When I met Eric, I was familiar with his story of being a whistleblower for witnessing highly advanced directed energy weapons, which we often call DEWs on this podcast, being used for crimes against humanity during his time at the South Pole facility in Antarctica he was stationed at, and as testified to Congress under oath about. Having listened to a few of Eric's interviews, it's shocking and alarming and very disturbing to listen to his firsthand experiences and to consider the implications on humanity that his claims hold. While we have spoken in length on this podcast about DEWs, electronic mind control, and how these advanced technologies are being used to target individuals, also known as targeted individuals or TIs, what most other interviewers featuring Eric haven't touched much on are his experiences as a child having been sold into the CIA Stargate and MKUltra projects. I was really thrilled when Eric agreed to come shine a light on this part of his testimony today and how his childhood experiences may add context to the path he took as an adult and the things he saw and experienced in Antarctica. We know from listening to survivor testimonies on the show that there are very little coincidences in a survivor's life, and that much of their life has been engineered and manufactured to fulfill different roles and duties in society, unbeknownst to them. I believe that Eric's full disclosure of what he went through as a child up until today will really bring validity and insight as to how and why he ended up in Antarctica as a contractor for Raytheon to begin with. For context on the Stargate project, if you are new here or haven't heard of this project, and according to Wikipedia, quote, the Stargate project was a secret U.S. Army unit established in 1977 at Fort Meade, Maryland by the Defense Intelligence Agency and SRI International, which, if you guys remember, we have had 3 Stanford Research Institute, aka SRI survivors, on this very podcast, to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. The Stargate project's work primarily involved remote viewing and the purported ability to psychically see events, sites, or information from a great distance, end quote. Eric comes to us today to disclose and share some of the most vulnerable moments of his life out of a personal and moral obligation and responsibility to shine a light on the darkness that exists in the world that is all but hidden from the general public. While there appears to be a concerted effort to control the mainstream disclosure movement, it'll be heroes like Eric who help us break through the controlled narrative by connecting public disclosures of all kinds to child behavior modification programs and government-sponsored child slavery, something very few have the courage to do or talk about. It's the piece that is missing for most disclosure movements. Eric is extremely passionate about helping to bring awareness to organized child abuse and crimes being committed against innocent children through our government and governments all across the world. And he is one of the few whistleblowers that was asked to give testimony for both the Senate Intelligence Committee and AARO. His shared testimony will be getting entered into the National Archives. We are so blessed to get to hear and learn from what he went through as a child so we can continue to piece together this puzzle of deception, one survivor and whistleblower testimony at a time. So I ask you all to please put away whatever you're doing, grab a pen and paper, and give this fearless warrior and overcomer your full attention as we dive deep into some new rabbit holes today. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast, share any information privately with me, or send me a written testimony to be written in a Substack article or in my upcoming book series, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. I've also partnered with a couple of my favorite brands to get you guys a couple discount codes on some of my favorite products, including Rife Technology frequency machines and blockers, and CZTL's high-quality methylene blue. The links and codes for these amazing products, as well as all the rest of my links, are in the show notes, and I'd love your support across all platforms. If you guys could please follow me across multiple platforms if you aren't already. In case you didn't know, my YouTube channel was just recently terminated, and I'm being forced to pivot and use other methods of streaming to get this important information out to the public and to the disclosure communities. Your support would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you all on the other side of the screen for helping to make the Imagination podcast the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, survivor and whistleblower, warrior and hero, anti-child abuse advocate, educator, and walking miracle, the one, the only, Eric Hecker. Eric, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Emma, thank you so much for having me and being willing to engage this topic. We spoke a couple of times on the phone prior to this event, and I was really blown away at your knowledge on these topics. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I feel like it's your experience and research that's actually going to bode well for helping to connect the dots for the community in regards to the information that I am also trying to share.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to have support from people like you, and it's been such a, I guess, pleasant surprise to see how many people actually do care about this. I'm sure you know it's really difficult when you come forward and talk about this. You feel really alone, and I'm not a survivor of it, and I even felt very isolated and like I had all these people against me, and it is really important. It's the most important topic, and there's reasons why people don't want to engage with it, and reasons why this part of the puzzle is sort of left out of the disclosure community, and it's really divided the disclosure community. If everybody sort of took their disclosures from all these different places and threw them into one basket, we'd come down to sort of this melting pot of child slavery through our governments, and child behavior modification programs. So I wanted to ask you, because you've done a lot of interviews, and I don't think many people have taken credence to the fact that it's mentioned multiple times that you were in Stargate and these different programs as a child, and it sort of just seems to get glossed over. And I wanted to ask you your thoughts on why you think that is. Why haven't some of these big podcasts engaged this conversation? I would think, looking at your resume, I'd be like, he was in what as a kid? Like, we need to talk about this. That's crazy, but it seems to almost just get glossed over in a lot of these interviews that you do.
I think the scary answer here is that the disclosure community has been wholly infiltrated by the same factions that are purporting this activity, and that the mass media has been wholly corrupted for many decades, and the community at large doesn't seem to want to engage the conversation at the possibility even that the disclosure community has been wholly infiltrated, commandeered, and controlling the narrative on these topics. And they're doing a great job at keeping the masses from engaging this topic. I've been trying for a few years now to get this information out there, and what I thought was a open and welcoming community fighting for the truth. And what I'm learning is it's anything but that. It's gatekeepers, it's controlled narratives, it's feds. It's rampant in the disclosure community that these folks are not actually interested in engaging the truth versus just putting out the disinformation and misinformation that's a benefit to the governments that are controlling us as puppets through an even higher level of oppressive people that are in the mix. And the last thing that they want to discuss is that this all boils down to child trafficking and abuse, because these programs know what they want out of us as an adult community, and they start applying their efforts and intentions to children. I went through it firsthand. I'm learning how pervasive child trafficking and abuse is in our community as a whole. As people of the world, we are unaware of how much effort is being applied to manipulate us as children. It was going on when I was a kid. It's going on now. And I warn the parents of the world, be very cautious who you are discharging your children to on a daily basis, because there's just bad folks out there.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. And that's one of the scariest things, is to think about that question of, if somebody was a pedophile, where would they hide? And the answers lead you to anywhere that has access to children. And you think about
Absolutely.
different people and positions in society where parents just trust that the person that is watching their child has
Hmm.
the best interest in mind for that child. And, even down to our schools, that's not the case at all. There really is a war against children. It's been waging for decades and decades, if not longer, but
Hmm.
officially government related on the records, for decades and decades ever since, after World War II. So your piece of the puzzle, I think, is really important because you aren't afraid to engage with that. And it's very telling what you said about relating the mainstream media to the sort of non-mainstream media community and sharing about how why wouldn't they apply that same method of mind control that they use through the TV into these other ways that people are now getting news. People are turning off their
Hmm.
TV and thinking, I'm going to go watch podcasts instead. They're the real
Right,
truthers. I'm not going to get anything off the TV.
right.
But
As
they
if
don't
that's
realize,
as if it's uncorruptible.
yes, and as if the people running these podcasts and a lot of the
Hmm.
hosts, aren't agents themselves, or
Hmm.
people that were basically positioned to be an MSM, just the other side of
Hmm.
it, which is the truther community, so
There's there's a gentleman in the disclosure community now. His name is Richard Doty, and he used to work for the federal government going around. When people would say that they saw a UFO, lots of times they were just seeing high-level government technology. So he was paid by the government to then go visit these people and convince them that what they saw was a UFO. That was his job. And he's still in the community discussing the UFO equation, which to me is ridiculous because a lot of people may not know this, but one of the people that Richard Doty went and visited and convinced them, oh, it's UFOs, you're being visited. It drove the person nuts and they killed themselves. So this is a gentleman who has blood on his hands and is still in this conversation. I would say doing what he's always been doing, being a disinformationist. But this is the history of what's going on in the truth movement, in the UFO conversation, and it shows the lack of limits to what the government would do. And this is something that Mr. Doty was involved with years ago before the internet. So if we know that that's what they were doing back then, if they simply had the motive and the monies to go door to door on a one-on-one basis to try to rewrite the narrative of reality, wouldn't it just simply be more efficient for them to take one of their agents, put a microphone in front of them and a streaming studio, and now manipulate the minds of the masses, trying to corrupt what they're viewing as reality and redefine it as something else. And I would say it's just obvious that it's going on everywhere. And I hope that more people can pay attention to the fact that, the podcasting community in general has some real problems in it.
it really does, and right down to I know I had said in the intro, my own channel, my small channel was terminated for talking about this stuff. And so I know
Mhm.
that there are risks to it on a platform like YouTube. However, there's also, I've noticed, even just from my own experiences, there is a concerted effort to put these people in positions to where they get all the followers, they get all the eyes on them, and they might talk about some of the stuff very loosely. But even let's just say MK Ultra, there are people that have a big following that will bring it up on their podcast. But really, they'll talk about, yeah, the government did these LSD experiments, and they sort of make it just sound like it was this kind of benevolent program that just dissipated, and it just involved like getting people to hallucinate a little bit, and it's not,
Mhm.
they don't even talk about how children are involved with it most of the time. I think
Right.
the general consensus is they were giving adults LSD in a room and then monitoring them, and it's like, no, you guys, this goes way deeper than what you're being
Mhm.
told, these little breadcrumbs, so
Yeah.
it is really important that we connect all this information, that we take these different communities and encourage them to come together, because that's the other purposeful thing, just like they've done in society with separating
Mhm.
us politically, religiously, through race, through whatever it is, gender now. They're
Mhm.
doing the same in these disclosure communities where if you had a UAP experience, you get your own community. You don't get to talk to people in these other communities. If you're a human
Mhm.
trafficking survivor, here's your
Mhm.
community. We're going to throw you in here. And it's like, wait, there's got to be something that ties all this together. Like this goes
Absolutely.
together if you listen to all these disclosures. I have satanic ritual abuse survivors that had alien programming or who saw a UAP, and then you have a UAP survivor that got, abducted as a child. And so
Mhm,
there's a lot of connections, and I think that's what your story does brilliantly because of your courage is it does help to tie this in because you've had so many different life experiences from a child up to an adult and have really got to see all the different ways that, the government has their hands in different things and how easily they can control the life of the children that go into these programs and sort of direct their life to where they want. And
mhm,
then as members of society, we just think, oh, this is a plumber or this is a celebrity. Like you just think that these people randomly ended up in these places and you don't realize that, hey, there was a path ever since they were little, basically, that they were sort of directed to where they go, and I feel like
mhm.
you've been able to really reverse engineer your story and say, okay, this, and this. But when we only hear your story of Antarctica, it's a incredibly harrowing truth that you share, and I wanna talk about that later on too a little bit, or bring you back on and have a whole episode on it because it really is shocking what you've, whistleblown about that, and I commend people for giving you a platform to share that. But I also see some interviewers really confused on how you got there, but they're not willing to engage you as and have the conversation of what you went through as a child, and so there's this big sort of missing link on, I think, how this all runs together and the different connections that your testimony can provide. So I thought maybe we'd go back in time and kind of just lay the foundation of how you did end up in these programs. And I wanted to ask you kind of what your family history was, if there was a generational pattern of family members or connections to the CIA that sort of led you, whenever you were born, to be automatically pushed and sold into these programs.
It's a great line of questioning, and I guess I would start out with, yeah, I absolutely do believe um, that there's something to do with bloodlines and families, and I'm doing research into my own history of my own family, and finding there are connections to very nefarious um, folks and factions. My grandfather um, was known to be a Nazi sympathizer since the high school years. He wound up being in the United States Navy and is the only person I ever heard of, or any veteran has ever heard of. And I have done due diligence to look, but my grandfather was stationed down in South America during World War II. He was stationed on the Amazon River in Brazil as a bosun's mate, transferring fuel. And the testimony I got from my father discussing this was that he was under the impression that his father was down there fighting the Germans to keep them from getting the supplies of rubber that they needed for fighting the war on their side. Well, it doesn't take much research for folks to find out that the Bush family was actually convicted post World War II for basically selling fuel to the Nazis. So the Nazis needed our fuel and we needed their rubber. And it appears that down in South America is where these transfer points were occurring. And it seems like somebody like my grandfather would have been a perfect fit to be at one of these facilities where the transfers were occurring. My grandfather was a member of the American Bund, which for all practical purposes was like Nazis in America. He was also a member of a very interesting group known as the Third Order of St. Francis out of Brooklyn. The First Order of St. Francis would be the priesthood. The Second Order would be the nuns. And the Third Order was like a secret priesthood that was allowed to be married with children. In taking his orders, so to say, he chose, and this occurred in high school, he chose, in order to show piety to Christ, you had to find some way to, I guess, almost be a detriment to yourself, like as if, Christ getting nailed on the cross and all that stuff. So basically, my grandfather chose that he would take cold showers every day for the rest of his life to show piety to Christ. And he did that. The other order that he took upon himself was that he would attend Mass every single day of his life, which he did. A very interesting fact about the Third Order of St. Francis out of Brooklyn in regards to the big picture, connecting all of the dots. The Third Order of St. Francis had zero middlemen and took their orders directly from the Pope. One of the things that the Third Order of St. Francis was charged to do as an organization was to be very active in what you would call the re-education of the boys of Long Island. So these are, peculiar aspects of my family history that I cannot call coincidental for what occurred to me in my youth and then things that followed. There seem to have been intentions by folks that could very well have been misguided from my perspective, but I can, as much as I may not agree, I can appreciate that what these folks were doing, they thought was good for the children.
Yeah. And what about your parents? Was there any relation there? Did your parents go through anything, or did it sort of skip that generation and then land with you?
I think I think what my parents went through by most people's definition would have been called an abusive childhood, even though they may not see it that way. They just think of it, as a strict upbringing, but I think that's part of how these programs work and how society accepted a lot of what we now know as child abuse. It's just by, one man's definition changes and the context for society. But yes, I would definitely say that both of my parents were abused as a child. I was not treated well as a child. I gather my grandfather was raised in a strict environment when you look at how he chose to associate himself and impose his own strictness against himself.
Interesting. I always think that gets left out of a lot of these conversations too. I think when people hear about, let's just say, MKUltra or a child getting abused, it's left out of the conversation how far back in the lineage it might go, and
Mhm.
that is also something I think on a lot of these disclosure podcasts and communities that are, like we were saying, maybe controlling the narrative that gets left out is that. And it's
Mhm.
a really important piece of the story because that's one way that we can validate this is that's something I feel just about every single survivor, with the exception of very few who maybe were abused um and not even necessarily abused, but where the connections came from, say, a teacher, or there's somebody else in the child's life outside of the immediate family that was involved with those things and brought the child in.
Mhm.
But really,
Mhm.
there's a lot of generational patterns with this. And
Mhm.
I want to talk about your birth and when this sort of started for you, and to help break down what Stargate was and discuss your experiences in MK Ultra. But one thing, just on the topic of the disclosures that we were talking about, that I think is really awesome, that I want to direct people to, is you have a website now that you're developing that is sort of helping solve that problem of this uh, mess of a community, in a sense, that we have, and it's really functioning as something that I think has the potential to bring a lot of people together. And I wanted you to just talk about that quick because there's information about you on there. And I want people to go, look further into your story and to see the other podcasts that you've been on, stuff. But also just, again, the opportunity to share how revolutionary this is with helping sort of solve this disconnect that we're having in the disclosure community.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Emma. Yeah, basically, since I've been in the community, I realized that censorship was a problem and growing. And that, like you're suffering under the boot of oppression from these platforms that claim to be putting the truth out there. I started a while ago to build my website, deciphering.tv, because I was realizing that freedom of speech is certainly no longer free. There it is right there. So what I've been trying to do is, I guess, make a repository for all these types of interviews that I've been engaged in so that people can start to search and connect the dots themselves. I feel like what I've been doing is kind of just putting out patches of truth here and patches of truth there for quite a few years. But I guess this is where I pull it all together like one quilt, so to say. It's kind of like having my own TV station. And what I'm trying to do now that it's gotten developed to this point is to kind of just start bringing other people into the fold that are suffering under censorship, that are simply just trying to do the right thing, trying to get the truth out there. I have the ability to go live from this website, and I want to start affording this to other people that are suffering in this censorship environment. And maybe we can all work together to get out from under this boot and start to accomplish actually getting the truth out there for people, in a way that functions, because everything else in disclosure to me right now seems wholly dysfunctional, corrupted and commandeered. So all I can do is put my best effort into working around that. And I'm in the trades. I like to build things. So I've been building this for a few years, and it's getting to the point where I can start sharing it with the community at large and offering that opportunity to folks to, work together for humanity, neighbors helping neighbors. If anybody's interested in getting onto a platform that's censorship free, contact me through the website, right? I'm open to discussions with people about, what it is they're trying to do. And if it turns out that this resource that I have might be to your benefit, let's have a conversation, because, many hands makes light work. And I wholly believe that we can accomplish a lot if we work together and stop letting the oppressive forces divide us.
It's wonderful what you're doing. We really need this. It's something I've been talking about and sort of thinking in my head how I can help with it, and one way is bringing people like you on who can take different disclosures and connect them. But I only have so much time in a day too. So it's really great that you're doing this. We need this so bad. We need to all come together and, come, instead of battling each other and having these different sort of, well, my disclosure group is right and yours is wrong, or this is right and this is wrong. We need to
Mhm,
just put all of our stuff in one spot, and discuss
mhm,
all of it together and connect it all. Because even if it's a similar
mhm,
situation or topic, but slightly different disclosure or experience, there's relationships with all of it. And,
mhm,
people have corroborating stories too out there that
mhm,
will help them feel less alone, and maybe they can help contribute. So this is great. And you have a contact tab right on here. And one of the reasons also I wanted to bring this up is you do have some really great resources on your page that I might bring up while you're talking about Stargate. I know you have
mhm,
some files on here, and you have some documentation uh, directly related to the government. This isn't just, uh, some stuff that you found on the internet. This is all like legit documentation. And I think it's great that you're also compiling that for us. So
mhm,
thank you for creating this. And I do encourage people. I know I'm going to definitely talk to you more about helping collaborate on this, because it's needed. We need safe spaces to not have to censor ourselves. It sucks that some of the things that creators hear on YouTube is, wow, I can't believe your channel wasn't taken down yet. It's like, what a terrible time we live in, where that's sort of, it's a miracle your content hasn't been taken down. We shouldn't have to worry about that. We should be afforded
right.
the right to at least share and let people make their own assumption about it, especially if we're not harming anybody, So this
Mhm.
is wonderful.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like they say, if you're living in a time period where you're afraid of your government, there's something that matter. And if you're living in an environment where you're afraid to speak your mind on a platform that's meant to disseminate information, well, there's something inherently wrong with the equation right off of the bat. And one of the things I wanted to key in on, what you were saying before, is so true about the communities, and how there's a click of information over here and there's a click of information over there. And heaven forbid you try to cross the lines. It's like whack-a-mole, and the whole industry comes after you for trying to basically simply break down the walls of compartmentalization. All we're witnessing is that the disclosure community is full of compartments. And that's how the government works, is through compartmentalization. I observed compartmentalization at the South Pole Station working really well, which was why the vast majority of people in that community were not able to connect the dots. My job afforded me the ability to go from compartment to compartment and pay attention to what's really going on. So I broke down the walls of compartmentalization of information at the South Pole Station. I learned a lot. Now I'm in the disclosure community, and I'm going to put that same effort forth to try to break down the walls of compartmentalization so that we can start integrating all of this important information so that we can see a much bigger picture of reality. It's almost like all of these compartments are going to be like tiles on a mosaic. And
Yeah.
until such time we're allowed to let them all connect, we will never see the big picture. And there are certainly observable activities going on by yet to be named forces or factions that seem to be working really hard to prevent the people from understanding the mosaic presented in front of them.
Beautiful way to put that. That's absolutely so true. And, it's refreshing to hear more people talking about that because sometimes, at least for me, I see all these people getting these huge followings and, they're basically sharing and speaking on behalf of survivors and whistleblowers. And it's really constructed and it's really manufactured. And it's sad that so
Mm-hmm.
many people are led to believe that just because somebody has a big following or they're promoted, that
Mm-hmm.
that's the person to follow, and not looking at it like, wait, is this a mainstream construct? Are they
Mm-hmm.
manipulating me? And just taking that same strategy from there and putting it
Mm-hmm.
here.
Yeah, it makes me think of like the music industry is a great analogy, right? There's a lot of people that are invested in, and that's the music industry, right? Does that mean that of all of the people in our great nation, does that mean that we're actually getting the best songwriters, the best guitarist, the best vocalist, or is it just simply that those happen to be the people that are invested in? You
That's a
know,
good
I
point.
I believe there's a lot of great guitarists out there I'll never hear from because they're not invested in. I believe there's a lot of great voices out there that I will never hear sing because they're not invested in. But now that kind of brings us into connecting to what you and I are aware of is these programs with children. And well, what does it mean to be invested in? And what do you have to do to get that investment? What's the program for getting put up on the pedestal and having the spotlight shined on you? And I think not enough people ask those questions. And I think there's enough information out there in the community at large. Everyone already knows the answer to this question. It's child abuse. There's so many celebrities coming out of the woodwork now, right? The mainstream has finally picked up on P. Diddy parties, as if child abuse in the music industry is new, as if child abuse in the movie industry is new, as if you didn't have to first pay your dues by providing sexual favors to someone. Like, are we going to sit back and act like this is new conversation that we shouldn't have engaged decades ago? If not for society on a whole, how about for the benefit of our kids? Let's stop child abuse. Let's stop allowing these programs that are doing well at compartmentalizing the information and keeping everybody from discussing the bottom line, least common denominator problem in the world today. Child abuse.
Period.
That's
You're
it.
right.
Right? Imagine if tomorrow morning we could literally imagine this. If tomorrow morning every pedophile, child abuser, and child trafficker was arrested and put away, what percentage of other crime would also disappear from that one activity occurring?
It's all connected. And again,
Right?
compartmentalization. They take what they
Mhm.
do and what they know about what our brain can do, which is
Mhm.
compartmentalize and fracture, and
Mhm.
they push that model on society and they fracture us into these different little compartments that don't,
Absolutely.
and you see it
Absolutely.
everywhere from like an organizational level all the way to a global level, how they're doing
Mhm.
it. It's like we're just one big MK Ultra project from whether it's
Yes.
one individual child like you that went through
Mhm.
it or what they're doing on a grand scale. There's a sliding scale of this happening.
It's very easy for me to see, as somebody who went through the ringer of these programs, what the application of trauma does in inducing a dissociative identity disorder and then the benefit to the manipulators to creating that circumstance, it's easy for me to look around in the community at large and observe that now what they learned by applying trauma to an individual to get the result that they were looking for, they've now just broadened the target to the entirety of the community. The whole world right now is being traumatized every single day. The result is the same and known outcome of a dissociation, and the product that they are manufacturing to be able to manipulate is now omnipresent everywhere you look.
Amen. Yes. And so let's get into your experiences and help people understand this from a smaller level, and then they can sort of use their imagination and be able to apply this, globally. And your story also, I know you said even as an adult in Antarctica, you noticed the compartmentalization from a sort of company military level. You got to see how that works in a very sort of classified environment where there are a lot of secrets and a lot of lies, and how so
Mhm.
many people can be deceived by that and have no
Mhm.
idea that it's happening just because they're focused on their one little job and they don't see a big
Mhm.
picture like you were able to. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, we went over a little bit of your family history and sort of how this primed you in a sense to be a prime candidate for this, whether it was through bloodlines, through family connections, both. When did this start in your life, and how did this where did it take place, I should say? Where was this happening at, and at what period in your life were you did this start?
I would have to say that the term that I use that I stole from a band, but I feel that it applies, is that it's from the womb to the tomb is their intention. So it's my belief that there were designs applied from the point of when I was in the womb until where I am today. I was born in the town of Bethpage on Long Island, which is a stone's throw away from the Grumman plant, which properly pronounced in German is Grumman. So, lest we forget that it was the Nazis running all of the aerospace programs, we got Werner von Braun, who came over as a former SS officer to lead NASA, and no one had a problem with that. That's very public, but there was a lot of other activities regarding Operation Paperclip and the greater Long Island area, which I'm doing more research on. But that for me is where it started, in a community that seemed to be very supportive of, let's just say, Nazi ideals and technologies. So I started out in the Long Island area, uh, as far back as my memories go, through the school years and some facilities in my neighborhood, that there was a lot of bad stuff going on. In my grammar school, a lot of people are familiar with the terms like the TAG program or the GATE program. I was part of that, and I would get removed from the classroom, regular, classroom activities, and I would be brought down into the library in my school. And I'll just explain what I witnessed. I did research to find out, like, this is how they do things. I didn't understand it at the time. As a child, I was wholly confused as to what was going on in the library. But as an educated adult, this is how these programs work. They would have all of the drapes shut in the library. It was very dark and out of the ordinary to normal activities in there. Upon entering the library, I was directed to sit in a chair, tilt my head back, and then a very cute girl. I'm not going to lie. I mean, she got my attention. And I think this was part of the program, right? It's disarming, part of the techniques that they use. So a very cute girl would give me direction to tilt my head back and receive the eye drops. She would tell me to stay still so you don't stain your uniform, which is like also kind of a threat as well, because I was well aware of the fact what would happen if I came home with stains on my uniform. I'd get a beating. So that's just, it was a very interesting dynamic. So I would receive the eye drops, and then the activities would be different from time to time. I'd be hard pressed to put them in a chronological order. So I'll just presented as a montage of recollections. There were times that they would put these headphones on us, and then we would lean into this device that I can picture. I believe it was called a tachistoscope, which was a device that was meant to show you things in a way of expediting education, that you could visually cue people to learn things faster by just kind of almost dumping it into their brain. Again, in my research, I've learned that human beings are very programmable by what we see, which is why we should also be very careful about what we allow ourselves to see. But I was being forced to look into this tachistoscope, and it would show a series of videos, still images running at high speed. And then the peculiar thing to me at the time was that there would be pauses in the presentation, and there would be questions that were presented. And I can't remember if the question came as an audio or on the screen, but I do remember that the way that it was answered blew my mind. Again, this was the early 1980s, way back before the technologies that we have now. There would be like a split in the screen, almost like a large plus symbol, but the lines didn't go all the way to the corners. So it would certainly differentiate like 4 quadrants on the screen, and there would be an answer in each of the quadrants. So it would be a multiple choice of one of 4 answers, and the question would be posed, and you answered simply by looking at your selection, and it registered your answer. And that blew my mind as a kid, because I knew like that was way more advanced than anything that was going on. And I feel like something was accomplished for me by maintaining my own thought process, that no matter what else was going on, I was so focused on, how does this work? This is amazing. And through the whole process, it's funny now that I'm saying it, I apparently had a dissociated aspect that could go through the training while being outside of myself, with major considerations being maintained as to what is the process I'm going through? What is this technology? So yeah, it's actually funny even just saying it right now. I was beside myself.
No pun intended, right?
Right. But then in that same library of activities, there were times, Ed Dames, that's a name that I always forget. Ed Dames, I once saw a video. He was with the original remote viewing programs, and I saw a video that he was doing with his own son. And the process that they were going through of the Robert Monroe Institute protocols for remote viewing, where you would write down an ideogram and then take your writing instrument, put it on the squiggly line that you made, and they would ask you a series of questions. That is exactly what we were doing in that library, but they weren't telling us anything about the activity. They weren't educating us. They were just putting us through the motions unbeknownst to ourselves. So that was another activity that we got involved with heavily. There were also times where there was abuse that occurred. So I don't have full recollection. There's certain lines in my memory banks where I can get up to a certain point where it's like, well, I know what happened next, but I don't really know, because I can't connect to that memory, which I think is part of how Mother Nature helps children that have gone through traumatic instances by moving that information away. But there were times in that library that we were also there was, I guess you would say, like bedding materials, like little pads and blankets that we were told, like, okay, now it's nap time. Right in the middle, like, we were too old for naps. And there was no point in having a nap. But there were times that, you're doing what you're told, you're in the dark corner of the library for nap time, but then strange adults would be brought in. And I can only imagine what was happening next, but that's, again, this is what these programs do, is they traumatize the child to the point of terror, to gain the function of induced identity disorder. And this, unfortunately, was a known way to cause what they thought was a great thing: expansion of consciousness. Stuart Swerdlow wrote a book called 13 Cubed, where he discusses that you can actually take, if you were to consider the mind like a solid cube, right? You could then fracture that cube, that one big cube, that one intellect or mind, spirit, whatever you want to call it. You can fracture it into 13 by 13 by 13, 13 cubed. So effectively, you now have, instead of one large compartment of space to fill, you now have up to 2,200 different empty compartments for which they can now program an aspect of you to occupy said space. And this is what these programs were doing to children, was traumatizing them to create the dissociation, to get the 13 cubed environment, so that then they can start working on, well, how can we fill these spaces up? What can we do now with this new playing field? These are conversations that rapidly go into the direction of, the Manchurian Candidate type stuff. What can we do? Can we set up all these different aspects, personalities, alters, whatever you want to call them? And then how do we figure out how to put them away and bring them out to our discretion? These are the games they were playing. This is the research that they were doing.
Thank you for answering that. I can't tell you how many people in MK Ultra and or satanic ritual abuse, which it all sort of goes together, mentioned that they were in TAG or GATE or MGM and were taken to a separate sort of unmarked room that traditionally didn't have windows, or they were covered up. And there were these really weird experiments and testing that they were doing on these children. And of course, kids are young. And again, they compartmentalize a lot of times if they're in these programs through dissociation. So they go home and they don't remember it or even know it's happening. But it's really disturbing to think that a kid can't even go to school without potentially escaping it, and that the government is so nefarious that they have these sort of secret factions set up in most schools that are scouting for kids that they can basically abuse and exploit for their gain.
Yeah, and I'll go even further to say that my experience as an adult and just seeing the world around us, I think I found myself in one particular program that was processing children for what they were trying to gain advantage in the future when these people were adults. But make no mistake about it, I believe that what's really going on is that all of our children are being processed by some factions that are looking for other products as well. I don't think any child in the world today gets out scot-free. I think there's some sort of department, faction, whatever you want to call it. All of these people have great liberty and access to our children with grand intentions for the future. I just happen to be able to identify the practices of the one group that was messing with me. Do I think all the other children in the classroom were left alone? No. I believe that there were other groups with other interests that were putting these children through a process and filtering them for whatever else adulthood might have been interested in. And I equate this just to like a farm, right? You have one main pen with all of the cattle in it. What's eventually happening to all of the cattle? You might corral some off one day in this direction and some get corralled in another direction. They're all product and they're all getting processed. I can only tell you about the one pen that I was in and then the other pen that I was brought to. Does that mean that the other cattle were safe? No, not at all. This is where we need to start looking at the big picture and why they don't want us integrating these stories and putting the mosaic tiles together, because we will rapidly find out that our children are in grave danger.
And it's really sad how much danger you were put in. Did your family have any idea that you were going through this, or did you have anybody outside of the programs that knew what you were going through, or was that sort of benign too to most people?
At the time, absolutely not. Nobody knew what was going on. I have since spoken to my father. I've spoken to my sister. None of them had any idea that I was going through this process. My father's livid because he feels like at the time that he had suspicions, and he's pissed, that he didn't figure it out at the time. But that's just life.
Yeah, and it's so sad that parents, the trauma wasn't only on the children, but these parents that maybe didn't know that their kids were being used in these programs through, say, a school or another entity, whether it's a person or another
Mhm.
organization that had access to the child and put
Mhm.
them in this. It's really sad
Mhm.
to think of that sort of secondary trauma that really gets put on the whole family when this is all discovered, and to think like that guilt that your parents had, and to think how these gifted and talented programs, and I know not every single kid is abused that goes into it, but they're all being scouted. Like that is an abuse if they're being exploited somehow. They're being tested on, even if it's just a
Mhm.
hearing test where they have these headphones on. Why are
Mhm.
they doing that? There's no reason that our government, parents should have that ability to go take their child to get a hearing test if the child needs it. It's really sick
Mhm.
how our government is taking control of this and then conditioning parents that this is okay, and parents are like, "Oh, my kid's in a gifted program. I'm so lucky. Is your kid?" And it's like touted as this like amazing
Mhm.
thing, and it's
Mhm.
not known until decades later what was actually happening, and it's terrifying. And
Yeah, there's a lot that can be accomplished through ego stroking is something that I've just learned through my life and my experiences. The parents get ego stroked. Oh, your child is so smart and we're going to help. Oh, the parents love hearing that. Myself, as a child, I was getting ego stroked when we got pulled out of the classroom. They made sure, like, to tell us, you guys are the smartest kids. Oh, aren't you happy you don't have to be in the classroom with those dummies for a little while? Like they did due diligence to make sure that we felt really proud of who we are. When I was an apprentice plumber, I worked with all of the different mechanics, all of the skilled plumbers in the shop that I was at, and I would hear how they were getting ego stroked and compartmentalized against each other. I would work with them and they would tell me things like, "Oh, make sure you pay attention to what I'm doing. Did you know that I'm the best guy in the shop? Did you know? Don't say anything to anyone else. But I make more money than everybody else in this shop." And I would go from truck to truck to truck as an apprentice and listen to each of these guys telling me the same thing, realizing they're all getting lied to. This is compartmentalization is a tool that's used by so many people. And then when I got to the South Pole Station and I would go from science lab to science lab, I would hear the scientists ego stroking stories. Oh, well, Eric, while you're here, let me tell you about what's going on in this laboratory because this is the most important science going on in the facility. And all of the other labs and scientists are really, don't say anything to them, but they're here to support what I'm doing. And everyone was saying this.
oh my goodness. That's
Yes, it's maddening from my perspective because I feel like I'm the only one that is able to observe this, but I feel like I've operated from a privileged position as a plumber. I would go to so many different places every single day and meet so many different people from the richest of rich to the poorest of poor. And I would talk to people like human beings. And I do not believe that the average person has anywhere near that depth of experience or engagement with such a variety of human beings. How many people see how many different people in a day and engage them deeply?
and I know
And
that
the
you were
the
given.
internet does not want us to engage human beings in a deep level ever again. They are manufacturing technologies fast and furious to keep us from having deep human engagement.
Did you experience any of that? I know you experienced some technology on yourself that was really mind-blowing that they were testing on you, reading your thoughts. Did you experience or see any of that technology that you saw in Antarctica, or anything like that in your time in these projects as a child too? Was that made known to you that there were these other types of, technology available?
Well, not so much the more modern stuff that we're dealing with today, but in regards to the remote viewing program and what they were connecting me to, which I have since found is how the program works. What they were doing to, I guess, effectively manipulate the mind, the psyche, the spirit, is apparently measurable through the central nervous system and our electrical impulses. And the way that they would do this would be by hooking me, up to what's called an EKG, echocardiogram, or an EEG device. I would be regularly brought to doctors' offices to be hooked up to these systems, and I don't have any medical issues. I didn't have medical issues. So it wasn't explained to me. I just was a kid doing what I was told. I would be brought to the doctor's office, and they would basically just take all of these little sticky sensors and place them all over me. I would be told to sit completely still, maintain a controlled breathing rate. And they were apparently measuring the electrical activity of my central nervous system with great regularity. And in my research, I found out that that's one of the ways that they would test for, I guess you would say, how much manipulation has been accomplished.
Oh my gosh. That's really terrifying too, to think that they're that sophisticated and, that they've been that sophisticated. I think that fact too really blows people's minds and disconnects them because they're like, they couldn't have access to all of this and they can't do that. And it's like, you really think that the government's going to share everything that they can do with us? Like they're just going to give us, the technology that's like sort of most harmless and most basic in a sense. And to us, it's so advanced, but like
Mhm.
understanding what actually exists is a whole different story. And
Yeah,
so,
and coming from my experience, when I hear people say stuff like that, when I hear them say that, I just hear them trying to convince themselves of that. Because they're certainly not going to convince me of that. I mean, I literally lived through it. So it's like, I appreciate that the stuff that happened to me as a child is next to impossible for me to prove, but that's a benefit to the oppressive forces that are doing this to children, is that they know there's almost zero ramifications. Can I walk into a courtroom right now and be like, I seek justice? What they're gonna laugh me out of there and be like, well, what can you prove? I can't prove squat because they lied to me when I was 6. I didn't get to go pilfer their paperwork and be like, aha, here's the smoking gun,
yes. Thank you for mentioning that. That's probably like one of the biggest things that I get from new people. They're like, where's the proof of this? And it's like, you really think that sophisticated abusers that work for the government are going to give a
Mhm.
child a packet of evidence and say, here, keep this for whenever you get older and you remember all of this. Go share it with
Yeah.
everybody. We're going to sign it here,
Mhm.
make sure that our photos are in here and our names and that
Mhm.
all the information that you went through and everything that we did to you is in this
Mhm.
file. Here you go. Like, no, that's not how
Mhm.
this works. It's compartmentalized. It's secret.
Yeah, yeah. Here's where we had a meeting about not letting your parents know what we were doing to you. Here you go, kid. But in regards to that question, too, like people say, well, where's the evidence? We know where all the evidence went for MK Ultra. The leader of the program ordered it to be destroyed, and it was thus effectively destroyed, except for a teeny little bit of paperwork that got out. So, that people have to realize that, that a lot of effort was put in to destroy the evidence. So how about we ask a question, because it's referenceable that the guy running MK Ultra, before he left and got out the door, he dictated all MK Ultra information be destroyed, and they destroyed it. So how about we ask why? How about
Yes.
we go back and we look at everyone that we can make connections to and say, why? What could have been going on that you made sure that no one in the future would ever find out? What kind of things can we put on that list of possibilities? There was a gentleman by the name of David Morehouse who was in the original remote viewing program. He was on a podcast with Danny Jones. I think it's called the Concrete Podcast. They did 2 interviews that I know of, and I believe it was in the first interview. At about the 17-minute mark, David Morehouse explains how he was present when the director of Central Intelligence received information that foreign nations were running children through the remote viewing Stargate programs. And I'm paraphrasing, but he effectively stated that almost instantly the director of Central Intelligence was like, well, then we need to invest in that. So I've been doing research and trying to find people that are speaking on this. David Morehouse, thank goodness, is the first adult that I have seen crack the dam on this wall of secrecy on this topic, stating that the United States government decided to invest money in experimenting on children in a Stargate capacity.
What was Stargate whenever you were in it, and what was this remote viewing program?
Stargate, in effect, was the government's title for a remote viewing program. It's my understanding that Stargate was basically the DIA's effort to start looking into what is consciousness. Just a simple question. That apparently consciousness is something palpable and can be understood and worked with and manipulated. So the Stargate program operated utilizing the Robert Monroe Institute's remote viewing program and a book by Itzhak Bentov called Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness, which I highly recommend everybody read that book. If you truly want to know what you're capable of in the cosmos, you need to figure it out. The CIA has figured out what you're capable of and learned how to manipulate that to their benefit and against yours. But again, what I'm trying to do is educate people on what I learned through my experience and how we can gain back the control that was taken from us as children so that we are not so easily managed as adults by these other forces that are applying their intentions upon us to make the world the way that they prefer it to be versus a world that's better for ourselves and our posterity.
What was the purpose of this remote viewing? Obviously, consciousness comes into play and pushing the limits of human capabilities. What things would our government be interested in using children to remote view?
You got it. So basically what they learned very fast with adults is that everybody can remote view. It's like being able to play the guitar. There's nobody stopping you from becoming an expert guitar player. It's just a matter of whether you want to practice to do it. So technically anyone can play the guitar and anyone can remote view. Some people are prodigies. Some people have to put extra effort in, but this is a skill set that is available to anyone who wishes to yield it. What they learned in working with adults was that there were adults harbored a lot of biases. So when they would utilize their consciousness to basically move outward into time and space for the benefit of gathering, you can just say information, knowledge. What they learned is that as a remote viewer, there's really no limits to what you can learn. And what they found out was that dealing with adults came with dealing with biases. So people would take their experiences and it would oftentimes taint the results of a remote viewing session. So the idea came that, well, if we deal with children, they won't come with biases and we'll get cleaner results. So that seemed to be a large reason why they went in the direction of working with children, was they could just get better information faster.
How many other children do you remember being in this program with you? And were they all used in the same, or really were all the same experiments ran on these children, or did you see different children being used for different things?
In the program that I was in, I would have to say that we were all doing the same stuff. In regards to the volume of children in the library, I would have to put it, I would say somewhere in the range of there being 8 to 12 of us in there. And I'm basically just trying to go back to remembering how many tables were there. And it was basically like one child per table, with an attendant.
And was the library the only place that your abuse and that these programs would take place, or were you taken to remote locations or other sites for this experimentation?
It was not the only place that the abuse occurred. It's the only place that I can recall that the training going on and the remote viewing. Um, as I mentioned, the medical offices for the EKGs and such. I was also brought to what they call retreat houses in parochial schools. You know, the term retreat, it's like a religious breakaway from the day. You know, you're not going to go to class, you're going to go to this building and pray to God all day, and your life will get better. But in that process, I would be brought to a facility, which I just went back to Long Island to do more research and found that the facility that I was brought to has since been torn down. It was referred to as the St. Ignatius Retreat House on Long Island. Still very referenceable on the internet, pictures and video galore. It was originally built by the Brady family, which was one of the more affluent families in the United States in the early 1900s. And the house was titled Inishfada, which is Gaelic for Long Island. The Brady family was probably the largest funding arm of the Jesuits in the United States of America. The house that was constructed on Long Island near Roslyn was the fourth largest house in the country when it was constructed. It is a mansion beyond description. And Mrs. Brady had intentions of the home being utilized as a re-education center for the boys of Long Island. The Jesuits eventually got the property donated to them by the Bradys. At one point in time, when the Bradys were still occupying it, there was a cardinal that visited the Brady property and then soon became Pope Pius XII. So these are all the things that connect in my past that, you know, as a single link in the chain, people could probably look at that link and go, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything and that doesn't prove anything. But when you start connecting all of these links and start realizing that this is a lot more than coincidence. You know, my grandfather belonged to the Third Order of St. Francis, took orders directly from the Pope. Pope Pius XII visited the property that eventually became the Jesuit property that got involved with more of the abuse. You know, going back to the original question, what are these places you got abused at? I got abused at the St. Ignatius Retreat House when I would be brought from school to go to what was supposed to be a day of holy activity. You know, so again, in the psyche of a child, it's off the wall challenging. You know, you're being told you're going to go meet God today. Well, I didn't meet God. We would show up, and you can imagine like a standard school trip where, you know, there's just a massive parking lot, all kinds of different buses are showing up. You get lined up in, you know, size order, alphabetical order, and there were buses from all of the different Catholic schools all over Long Island showing up for what is probably some sort of coordinated day event. Whew, this is a tough one. So we would basically, as we were approaching the building, myself and some other students would get siphoned off and told, once again, you guys are special. You don't have to go with the rest of the children. And we would get brought around to the back of the building. I have done regressions and worked with people, and people can consider whatever they want on what they think the validity of these energy exercises are. Um, I've worked with folks that are not so good at it, and I've worked with folks that are good at it. Just like there's good plumbers and bad plumbers, you can't throw the whole trade out. But having worked with some good folks during a regression, I was brought back to a memory I had forgotten. Um, and that was that when we got separated in the parking lot and we would start to be moved to the back of the building, there was a woman with like a lunchroom tray, the plastic trays, and there were little I call them doggy bags, like just little wax paper bags, and there were snacks in there. And upon heading towards the back, they would always say like, "Oh, and don't forget your snacks." And we would stop and pause and eat these. And I had totally forgotten about that. And the regressive lady and intuitive, she goes, "Those were your eye drops for the day." And I was like, oh, ouch. Like, yeah, there's no reason, you know, to treat us at the moment. But yeah, we were getting treats. First thing, and then no, in the grand scheme of how our curriculum and our normal days went, we were not usually treated nicely ever. So the fact for them to just all of a sudden afford this pleasantry into the equation is so peculiar. It doesn't match everything else. But regardless, we would eat the treats and then be brought back to the rear of the building. My recollections was that this was probably springtime, summertime, from what I can see with the flora in the area. And we were brought up to a massive, massive room that was basically T-shaped. And we were coming in across what would be considered like the top of the T. There were big, massive doors. And I recall it was so unnerving at the time as a kid and challenging to discuss. But the door opened, and there were other Catholic school females in there. And I know that because of the plaid skirts that they wore. Every school had their uniforms. Ours was kind of like a bluish tinted plaid, and the boys had blue shirts. Girls, we had slacks, but the girls had the plaid skirts. We had matching shirts, and it would all show that we're all from the same Catholic school. When we entered that space, there were girls that had, I guess you would say, like a yellow-based plaid skirt. So we knew they were Catholic school girls, but we knew they're not from our school. They also didn't have their button-up blouses on. So we were young. So basically it was girls in undershirts and skirts. And so we knew that to be wrong. Like, you're not supposed to be seeing the girls without their shirts on. But we were immediately basically told like, "Oh, it's okay. It's so hot in here that we told the girls to take their shirts off, and you guys can take your shirts off too. So since it's so hot in here, we want you to be comfortable." And this was so off the wall. This was I knew at the time, I'm like, this is effed up. Like, what's going on right now? But like I mentioned, we approached that room from the end of the top of the T. There was a stage in the middle of the conjunction point where the perpendicular part of the T shape of the room would connect. And there was kind of just large bookcases so that when we entered, you couldn't really see the other part of the room. But long story short, I would be directed to get onto the stage with a female from the other school. And upon getting to the center of the stage, I could then look to my right and see that branch arm of the room was full of seating and occupied by very old adults. And I will just say that my memories are challenging to go much further. That's what I witnessed. And then I remember that it was like I mean, there was a terrified girl in close proximity to me, and we were being directed to get closer, to engage in activity that I just don't want to discuss. And I remember just trying to do my best to console the girl, to say, like, it's, you know, everything will be all right. Like, what are we gonna do? And I always felt badly for the terrified look on her face.
Oh my
And
God.
at that point, I pretty much tap out on recollection, but I'm cognizant of what would have been occurring next. Was that we were being directed to perform as children in front of adults.
How many people were in the audience?
Oof. It's so funny because in my brain, it's like I know I could look that way, but it's almost like I still don't want to.
Yeah.
I would say there was a lot. I would say dozens.
Anyone that you recognize? Did you?
Oh no, not at all.
No.
I would not have attempted to look anyone in the face.
Thank you for sharing that. I know this stuff is really difficult. It is
It's
so,
rough.
I mean, to try to, if an adult was put in that position to do that and that wasn't the, they weren't like a sex worker, like it wasn't something that they'd done before, like that would be extremely traumatic as an adult to have to contend with being forced to do something like that. But to be a kid and the people who are supposed to be protecting you, the establishments that your parents are trusting that you're in good hands with, the programs that you're in that are esteemed so highly, it's really terrifying and disgusting and heinous to
Mhm.
think that there's people that will take advantage of that and exploit children for their gain, unbeknownst to even the child, because children compartmentalize like what we were talking about and dissociate. And, I thank you for sharing that. That's horrifying. And I know that you're not the only one who had to do stuff like that, and so you're giving a voice to a lot of people, and not everybody made it out of these programs, which is extremely sad, and they deserve voices too, and a lot of them had to do these really heinous things that you did. So I really appreciate you, Eric, just sharing these glimpses into your life. It's really sad to think that you had to contend with that. It's like kids should be having a lollipop and playing outside, or doing stuff that kids do, and like you're having to
Mhm.
manage being an adult in a child's body and not having your free will, having that totally stripped away from you at such a young, vulnerable age, and made to do these things that are just absolutely heinous, and the fact that there's not people on the streets for this, it's like we go in the streets for politicians, we go in the streets for race wars, but when it comes to the kids, people just sit. They just sit, and if people do speak out, it's conspiracy. But yeah, all
Right.
the other stuff that people are in the streets for aren't conspiracy, and it just blows my mind. It's like, how are we not outraged that this happened not just to you, but this is still happening today? They might have,
Right.
you
That's
know,
the problem, is that's the part that agitates me, is that I'm already aware that a certain percentage of the population that watches this video is going to instantaneously say, "Oh, he's full of crap. Oh, that's not true," because it tolerates them not having to engage the problem. It's just they're being cowardly. They don't want to believe it's true. They don't want to know it's true, I should say, because otherwise they might have to question what happens to their children every day. They might have to admit that they fucked up, that their children are in this program and they're not doing enough.
or that their idols, the people that they follow, the politicians that they vote for, the
Mm-hmm.
podcasters that they listen to, the celebrities that they have their
Mm-hmm.
songs on replay in their car could be
Mm-hmm.
engaged in this, whether it's something that they're doing willingly, consciously, or unwillingly and
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously. The
Yeah.
the depth of how much this has penetrated society is horrifying, and I think that is the main thing, is people are afraid of the implications of how that affects their daily life and the things that they feel so emotionally, physically, even spiritually connected to, that there could be corruption in those things that they hold so dear to their heart, or those people, or those movements, or the establishments, and like we have to look at it like we don't have a choice anymore. The fact
Mhm.
that this has been going on as long as it has, that you are now an adult speaking, so many adults are now coming out and wanting to share what they went through, and it happened to them as little kids, and that each generation has just sat back and watched it and not
Mhm.
stopped it.
Mhm.
Like, oh, it makes me super emotional. It's like, how are we doing this? Like, how do we
Mhm.
try to stop everything else and we're up in arms, but yet these little precious kids like are going through something just so horrible, and like they can't stand up for themselves. They can't go on TikTok and make videos, or YouTube, like they're
Right.
just stuck at the hands of abusive people that should be protecting them.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
So
I've had friends of mine that I went to school with that absolutely they're never going to come public. But they have reached out to me and were like, dude, keep doing what you're doing. So it's just, this is what has to be done.
And I think for men too, I've noticed there's more men having the courage to speak out, but I think the stigma on abuse with men is also different than women.
Yes.
And the men's
Yes.
stories are really important because a lot of men had different roles in this than women did, and they went through different things that also contribute to a bigger picture that would make sense if they would speak up about it.
Hmm.
And I understand why people don't, and I understand the stigmas and the shame and the guilt, and you put a target on your back when you do this. A
Hmm.
lot of people have families and kids, and like it puts you in danger, you know.
Yeah.
But man, if everybody would just stand up, like we could end this right now. Like there's so much
Yep.
more of us than them, and we
And
forget how
you're very
powerful.
right. It's a very different dynamic, unfortunately, and it's not this had nothing to do with men's rights, women's rights, but
No.
the reality is that society is way more familiar with the idea of girls being sexually abused than boys. And they don't really realize that there is actually a lot of adult women abusing young boys, and a lot of people will laugh almost like, oh well, what's the problem, the guy's getting some, and it's like, no, it doesn't work like that. That's not how a child's brain works. And I had a very good friend of mine who started to open my eyes, because I really thought what occurred to me was super rare. But she started to educate me. She goes, no, you don't understand. She goes, this is way more rampant than you've considered. You have peers. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? So this is again something that we need to pay attention to in society, unbeknownst to all of the parents out there. Your boys are also susceptible to this too. And it's not just look out for that gay guy over there that might want to diddle your son. There are bad women that are being bad to little boys. This is also going on and also rampant and needs to be addressed.
That is so important what you just brought up. That's something I've noticed too is of course the what's presented to us is never these types of conversations where it goes this deep, but you do hear little leaks about a teacher abusing a kid or a priest. But one of the most common things that I've noticed is that when you hear about a young girl being abused by, say, a teacher, people have such pity on it and they feel so terrible. But when it's a little boy abused by an older teacher, well, that's a female, the comments will be, "Oh, that kid was so lucky, like, he hit the jackpot with an older woman," and I'm like, "How? Like, what? This is disgusting, you guys, like, that is a
Right,
pedophile, like, that's a freaking
right,
pedophile abusing a kid.
exactly.
That's
And
child
they're
abuse."
they're 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 presuming an adult mentality out of a child, which isn't it's not the case. You know, they're applying what they know at their adult moment in life and expecting that that kid is going to feel anything other than confusion or trauma. It doesn't work that way.
100%. And I wanna be respectful of your time. I know it's been about an hour and a half, so it's
I'm doing
totally
fine.
okay, you wanna keep going a little
Yep.
bit?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. Yep. Fire away.
because I know we're just sort of touching on some of the stuff in your story.
Well,
So
I'll already offer. I'll definitely come back because this conversation is worthy. And yeah, so I mean, by all means, keep going, and then I'll already do a return visit because this is very engaging, and I think it's good to get the truth out there.
how old were you when that experience happened? Was that still very, very young, or was that a little bit later in your school
I would
year?
say that was a little bit later compared to the onset in the beginning. I would say that that recollection for the viewing audience, I probably would have been in the ballpark of, say, somewhere between maybe, I would say, fourth and sixth grade.
Okay. And how long total were you put in these sort of special programs, whether it was through school or otherwise?
To the best of my recollection, I would say it was probably kindergarten through eighth grade in regards to the activities in the library and the retreat house
Okay.
and the EKGs at the doctor's office. I believe something switched in the application of the program from what was going on in my school directly. When I got to high school, I would say things got more violent. I would say in the community, not necessarily in the school, but I feel like that was almost some other level of training per se, like as if we had graduated into the next level of stuff. I didn't realize at the time when I was growing up how violent my community was until I left it, and I just thought everyone was growing up like I did. There was a bunch of gang violence. There was, I mean, what I considered fun with my friends at the time. I mean, legit, like I didn't think much of it. Um, I partook in more violence with my friends than most people do with their enemies. And we just looked at it like just like it was almost like sparring or screwing around because you better get good at this because heaven forbid you have to do this with someone who's not your friend, which happened quite regularly. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times I got beat up simply just because the community that I lived in, there was so many times where, I'd be walking home, I'm by myself, and all of a sudden there's 12 dudes that just really don't like the fact that I'm on their street. So just taking beatings was just a part of life. So I feel like what happened in grammar school was almost like coordinated beatings from the program. And then it was almost like we were let on the street to see, like, how do we work in small teams, close quarters combat? It was like, now it was like almost learning how to practically apply. How much of a beating can you take in the real world?
And I've often wondered that too. I've had that talked about on my podcast before, how gangs are essentially, in these different areas of poverty, of, the projects, as we call them
Hmm.
in your local areas, the places
Hmm.
that you don't want to be, and
Right.
are always on the news for crimes happening.
Hmm.
You have to wonder if that isn't some type of an experiment, because they do get awfully isolated in those areas. People don't want to go there. They don't want to
Hmm.
interfere. The cops sort of even oversee everything and allow
Hmm.
things to happen. And there's not an intervention to take care
Hmm.
of that. It's just allowed.
Yeah. That's one of the weird things. So I actually saw in another podcast, there was a gentleman that was doing a dive into the tag and gate programs. And one of the things that they were pulling off the internet was from the testimonies of all these different people that were in the programs, they started to put together a list of commonalities. And I was intrigued by how many things I was associating to on the list. But one of the things that blew my mind on the list was how people in these programs would, for the most part, just get a pass from the police. If something went wrong, you would just get out of here. And I cannot begin you to tell the amount of times I got a pass from the police was not even funny. I mean, there's the only thing that I was involved with more as a kid than the police would have been the gangs. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. When I was a kid, I was a derelict. We were constant, like, again, I thought I was living a common life, that every kid was doing what I was doing. I'm wrong. We were constantly up to no good. We were constantly committing crimes. We were constantly crossing paths with the police that were constantly letting me go.
And what was life like for you at home? Did you experience abuse there too? Did you go home without relief and your parents just kind of enabled you to do these things and had no idea that you were, basically on the streets as a child, involved in violence and crime? Or was life at home someplace that you could go that felt safe?
My home did not feel safe.
Oh,
I avoided my house as much as possible. I avoided engaging with my parents as much as possible, because it never led to anything good. So I've been working on the books since I was 12 years old. One of the main reasons was is I learned that if I had work, I didn't have to be at home. It was a free pass of life. So the more I could work, the more I didn't have to be at my house. So it was a very good thing. I had a lot of jobs. When I was a kid, I oftentimes would have 2 and 3 different part-time jobs. Um, it was also when child labor laws were getting mixed up, and I was livid as a kid that the government was limiting how many hours I could work on a school night, how many different school nights I could work in a week. But what I soon realized was, well, that's per job. Each employer, if I don't tell the other employers about the other jobs, well, I can work 2 days here, 2 days here, I could still load up my schedule and take that, Uncle Sam. You just got outwitted by a kid.
oh my goodness. Did you ever
Yeah, so go ahead.
have anybody in your life because you couldn't go home, you couldn't go to school? Was there ever anybody who reached out and said, "Hey, are you okay? I'm noticing that maybe you're misbehaving, or I'm noticing that things that you seem troubled. Is there something going on?" Did you ever have anybody that noticed you?
Uh, Sort of, not to the depth of what you're saying. There was not that level of communication. But the chaplain in my high school was a very good man, unlike most of the priests that I came across. And I would say because he was probably the most unpriest-like priest I ever met. It was he was almost like a thug in and of himself. And I would just say that he was very aware of what was going on in my household. He was very aware of what was going on in the community. He always told me he had an open door if I ever wanted to discuss anything with him. I never took him up on that. But what he did do, because he knew. So in his chaplain's office, he had his desk. And he informed me. He said, in the back of my top drawer, he said, there are pre-signed passes. If you ever need one, if you ever need to be late, if you need to go somewhere else, if you need to do whatever you need to do, go take a pass and do whatever you need to do. That was afforded to me, which was convenient because sometimes I needed those passes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There seems to be, when I listen to a lot of these stories, directly or indirectly, even if the person, like what was in your life, didn't come in and save the kid or, do anything drastic, just having somebody that like showed kindness in some way, like had a really tremendous impact on the person's life. They were able to sort of hold on to that moment when things got
Mm.
rough, or how you had an option to do something.
I can remember another time where he gave me assistance. We had We had a big basketball game at my high school one time. And like I said, we were derelicts. If I remember correctly, there was a visiting team. I can't remember if it was Lithuania or something. It was from a foreign country that was like a former Soviet bloc country, right? And so, I mean, we were all 80s era kids. So to us, it was like the Cold War was happening in our in our basketball court. And I feel like all of the players felt that way. We had friends on the team. I'm sure that they felt tension for, what I mean, we were providing a tense environment for them. We were messed up. So, long story short, in the middle of this game, it turned into a full-blown brawl. Bleachers cleared, and there was just a full-blown riot was happening in the gymnasium in my school. It was pouring out into the hallways. People were fighting everywhere. I wound up getting nose to nose. I was locked up with the athletic director of my school, where we're throwing hands, and I'm just like, it was like, this is what we do. So I was messing with that guy, and all of a sudden my dean of students came up and got involved and told me right that, you're expelled, don't ever come back, that's the end, all kinds of expletives back and forth, and I don't give a f, I was effectively expelled at that moment. As I was exiting the pandemonium in full melee, the chaplain, in the middle of all this pandemonium, must have observed what was going on. And he said to me, I mean, yelling. It was, chaos. He was screaming through the crowd at me. He goes, whatever you do, he goes, you come back here Monday. I will fix this. He goes, you are not expelled. He goes, I will fix this. You be here Monday. And I said, all right. And he fixed it.
Did your parents ever know? Did that ever get back?
No, no, no. The last thing I would ever do was go home and tell my parents anything that happened at school. Never, ever, ever would I have said, oh, hey, Dad, Sister Joan slapped me in the face today, or hit me with the ruler, or bashed my. I would never say that, because I would have got hit immediately again,
Oh,
and asked, what did you do? Yes, no, there's again, I didn't engage my parents because it never would have led to anything good. They from what was apparent in my firsthand experience was they weren't on my side.
that's so sad. It's so sad. Like, I don't know. So many times the parents are complicit, whether they mean to be or not, in just not engaging with their children, and many of these families are co-active. So of course, like, it runs generationally, but it's just really sad how there's this sort of, and I mean, I see it now in parents all the time, just the lack of engagement, with
Mhm.
children, and in wanting to support them with whatever it is that they're going through. And it's sad to think that you can't even go home and just feel safe. And one of the things that obviously they depend on in these programs is your level of dissociation and compartmentalization. Did you ever have
Mhm.
breakdowns in programming as a kid, or disclose anything to anybody?
I don't think I ever disclosed anything to anybody because I don't think I understood what was going on. My perspective at the time would be, this is school. My parents are paying for me to go to this school. They certainly must know what's going on. This is school. I had no reason to believe at the time that anything. Well, it's now sounds ridiculous in hindsight with the sexual abuse. I should have known better at the time, and I should have said something, because I would know that that was an extracurricular activity. Um, I guess I didn't see an environment that would have been receptive.
And they distort that so early. That's really difficult for a child, I think, they might feel like it's wrong, or It might be something inherently that a child just knows, like, hey, something's not right. This doesn't feel good, or I feel like I shouldn't be doing this. I feel awkward in the situation, or that it's wrong. But if without the context of what that is, I think it's really easy to condition a child to just override those emotions and be like, you're silly, like you're crazy, there's something
Oh
wrong with
yeah.
you. Like,
And I believe that the bad people in these equations are so aware of the situation that they're setting up. And like you said, like the chaplain, he knew what was going on. There's so many people as adults that I'm sure were able to look in my direction and be well aware of the type of household that I was from, the type of child that I was, and that's exactly what they're looking for. They want a kid that's not going to talk to his parents. They want a kid that's coming from a broken home. They know all of the things on their list of bullet points that make the victim desirable. And I just happen to fit the bill.
and so while you were going through this, and I know it changed, and after this, I want to get into sort of how that evolved going into high school and some of your older
Mhm.
formative years. What would a typical day look like, going into this? Would you go to school and attend class first and then be taken out? Would this be maybe after school programs or field trips, things like that? Obviously, it happened at the library, so there was stuff going on, in the actual school. But what would kind of a typical day look like for you?
A typical day for me, I would go to class first before being brought out. Class to me is actually rather interesting. I was very academically advanced, so every grade that I was constantly offered to be advanced grade levels, multiple grade levels even. For whatever reason, my mother refused. She thought it would be bad for me socially to be advanced academically into other grades. So when I went to class, I would sit in the classroom and do the classwork that was presented for the grade level that I was in. Additionally, while sitting in that same classroom, since I could get all of that work done so rapidly because it was just so freaking easy to be doing second grade work in second grade. I don't know what to tell you. I found everything at that grade level to be so simple. So I would wind up having the teachers from the higher grades would come into my classroom quietly, because the other kids are working, and then they would kneel down next to my desk and they would give me higher grade level work to do that I would complete in the same classroom as the other students of my age range. And they would give me work to do, they would come check on my work. Sometimes when completed, I'd be allowed to take my work to go to the teacher's classroom at the higher level, which I thought was kind of cool too. Now that I think about it, it was like, I get to stand in front of the classroom of, the seventh graders, and I just did the same stuff you guys did. So again, that whole ego stroking, I did feel special academically because I was kicking ass and taking names when it came to the curriculum. They pretty much couldn't put anything in front of me that I couldn't just slaughter. And then I, would get pulled out of the classroom, go do the stuff in the library. To the best of my recollection, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like that happened in the afternoons. I don't know why. Maybe because that's how long it took the feds to set up from getting from their office, prepping and you know, doing afternoons at the grammar school and doing the remote viewing protocols.
Do you remember if this was every day that you went to school, or did they have
It was
specific
not
times in the
it
week?
was
Okay.
not every day. I would say that there was probably, I would say, maybe a couple of visits a month for the library activity.
Now, your path eventually, and it's again what we talked about that you speak on a lot of podcasts. You were sort of directed into a path throughout your life. Looking back, you can kind of see how these dots line up and how there was sort of a manufactured path for you. Do you recall anything from childhood that you can connect to that and say, okay, I can see already how they were priming me for the work that I did later in my life?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, yes. At the time, no. But
Right.
so one of the things that's a very interesting dot to connect was that I eventually made it into the United States Submarine Service. It is referenceable that part of what they were doing with the remote viewing was since they learned that consciousness and information can move through time and space unhindered by any other science or technology that we're familiar with. They started doing research into seeing if they could use remote viewing as a means to communicate with the personnel on a submarine submerged out in the ocean. So I can't think of it as being a coincidence that I happened to be in a program as a kid that had the intent of manufacturing submariners with remote viewing skills. And I eventually made it into the submarine service. I do not believe that the United States Navy, the job that I volunteered for with the United States Navy was to be what they call a fire control technician on Los Angeles class submarines, which would have put me in charge of the button that would fire up to and including nuclear tipped weapons having the capacity to kill millions of people. I do not believe that the United States Navy, in all of their infinite wisdom, tradition, intention, and application of funding, was waiting for me to turn 18 years old to volunteer for the service to then begin training me for such a role. I believe that factions like this, like I was stating earlier, there's many factions on the planet that are invested in processing our children for the product they need in the future. I believe the United States Navy invested in me at a very young age to start working my brain in the direction of somebody that would be very comfortable in that position to push that button exactly when they said to, without pause.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying to reflect on. And it probably seemed pretty innocent as a kid. Like you said, it didn't strike you as odd, which again, your whole childhood was very distorted with odd things that were normalized. But that's very telling. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. That's not something that people just get into or volunteer for, or,
Right,
it's not really a path that you hear about a lot of people just randomly one day being like, I'm gonna do this with my life.
right,
So that's
absolutely.
especially whenever you were introduced to that as a child. And so
Mhm.
what were before we, either move in a little bit into that joining, the part of your life where the Navy came in and sort of that year 18, was there anything important in the high school years, and how was that transition for you? I know you said the programming sort of started to evolve a little bit. What did that look like?
I think the evolvement of the program through the high school years was being immersed in an environment of violence outside of the school versus inside of the school. It was like ooh, it's so funny. I don't know the right words, but it's like this is how these programs work: is they make things opposites of each other. I've heard this alluded to before, but the vocabulary is beyond me at the moment. But there's a challenge that occurs in the mind when you're constantly flip-flopping things. So previously, in my youth, I was getting the vast majority of my violence was occurring in the school. When I got to high school, the high school I went to was actually violence was so forbade that if you got into a fight in school, which is like I mentioned, if you get into a fight in school, you're expelled. That's it. There's zero tolerance for violence. And it's so far as that, like, you had to be careful because even like if somebody came and punched you in the face, like technically you could get expelled for that because you were involved with violence. Like, so it was really hard to the other extreme. So again, the communities that I was operating in, we had a propensity for violence that we now had to control in this arena. And then they even made it so far because, again, I guess you would say we were kind of rule breakers, line steppers, whatever you want to call it. we got very good at not being violent in school, but we would then exit school, walk down the street, and kick each other's asses. But apparently, then they switched the rule that, well, if you get in a fight in school or in your school uniform, you're expelled. So then we started bringing a change of clothes. So as soon as the last bell rang, you would change out of your uniform because you're going right back to the streets where violence is going to occur. So it was I guess you would say the pendulum swung in the other direction, which now had to make your mind learn this is where you apply control, and this is where you show how good you are at violence and or taking a beating. I'll be honest, I mean, I'm not a violent person by choice. I don't like fighting. I'm very good at de-escalating, but with the caveat being, if it comes down to it, I have no problem throwing hands with someone because in my experience, I've been beaten up so many times by a dozen or more people that when one angry person walks up to me with two angry fists, I think that's hilarious. Like, what are you going to really do? You got two hands? That's it? You don't got a dozen people around the corner that are going to join in on this?
My gosh, that's so sad.
But that's, again, this is the level of experience that I have is technically, I've gotten beat up so many times by so many people that it doesn't mean anything anymore.
Which is really sad. That shouldn't be something that any human has to get used to. But at the same time, I'm glad that you, as an adult now, can be empowered with that. It did do something with your strength and
Mhm,
resilience. You're one of the toughest
mhm.
people I know for sure, and you don't back down for anything. So I'm glad that that affected you that way and didn't make you cower when it came to people maybe being confrontational with you. And you can see that on your interviews. You're very good at um staying grounded when people might be trying to attack you or maybe discredit you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I have an intuitive aspect to tell sometimes when there's people. I've certainly had interviews go south where I can tell that the people were, feigning support, but actions speak louder than words. And there's lots of times where I can tell that people are having me on because they're trying to discredit me. They're trying to find an angle of attack, even though they don't want to look like they're attacking. But that's what's going on because there's a lot of folks in these communities that are really trying to do due diligence to, like you were saying earlier, to keep these topics disconnected.
100%. And
I've had people that I've interviewed with that they love throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? So basically, when I came out to the public, I thought that I would share the actionable intelligence, the verifiable stuff from South Pole Station that I wanted people to consider. I never thought that I have to engage in who I am, my past, but apparently this is the way of the world that people want to know everything about everything. But now what I have found is that there are folks that their angle of attack is thus. Oh, you say that you were in the Stargate program? Well, you can't prove that. So therefore, everything you're saying about the South Pole Station must be a lie also. And it's like, well, that's an interesting angle of attack, is that you're going to just basically say the stuff that I absolutely can prove, have proven, and testified in Washington, D.C., in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee in Arrow. You're going to say all of that means nothing because when I was abused as a child, I can't prove it? I mean, that's just patently absurd. And to me, that's a clear indication of that there are forces aligning against the truth. And in my direction, they've just run out of ammo.
And I'm sorry, but a testimony is evidence. These are your memories. This is your life. And if you corroborate it and listen to other survivor testimonies who are in the same program as you or a similar one and who had a very similar upbringing, there are layers of corroboration that you can
Mhm.
see between complete strangers who had a very similar, if not exact experience that completely corroborates somebody else's testimony. And it's
So,
not a coincidence.
in that vein, let me ask you a question. How many people do you think you have come across and discussed having similar experiences to me?
Oh my gosh, almost every single person on my podcast. Maybe
But
not exactly
how many people is that?
150 at least.
Okay, so in your dipping your feet into this arena, so to say, you've come across approximately 150 people with similar experiences to me.
At least, and that's been on my podcast. That's not including the hundreds, if not thousands, of emails I get, especially from gate people. I did a really great expose on gifted and talented and tag programs, and hundreds of
Mhm.
emails. Oh my gosh, me too, me too, me too, me too, me too.
Oh, wow.
Okay, well, there's something going
Mhm.
on here. You know, a lot of
Mhm.
people, and a lot of the people that weren't necessarily experimented on in the way that you were, where they were, because I've noticed there's two sort of gate layers. There's the gifted and talented tends to be a or can be a bigger selection of kids, and by big I might mean maybe 50 kids
Mhm.
potentially, and then out of those there might be 2 to 10 that get further compartmentalized into a more advanced program,
Mhm.
which is like what you went through, and so there's
Mhm.
smaller aspects of that. However, even kids that were just in gate, most of them don't have any memories. I would say 90% of all people that I've met that were in gifted and talented or tag programs cannot remember a single thing. They remember what happened before they went to the classroom, they remember what happened after, and even some of their parents don't remember and have
Mhm.
had to investigate. And a lot of these schools won't give the records for the
Mhm.
children. It is a really it's a big
I,
thing.
I think that just goes to show how effective the dissociation is. Again, I wholeheartedly feel that this is an aspect of Mother Nature that these folks are taking advantage of.
It
It
is.
is Mother Nature loves her children. If a child is abused enough, is traumatized enough, Mother Nature affords the benefit of dissociating. It is supernatural.
Yes.
People want to look at this as a negative thing. It is the opposite of that. It is the love of Mother Nature for her children to provide this benefit. It is a shame that there are dastardly people that are taking great opportunities at what Mother Nature affords to what's supposed to be a rare incident, and they are just making it manifold in our society.
Yes, they're forcing it, and like you said, they are exploiting it, and they're doing it on purpose, and you're 100% right. It's a defense mechanism that is in 100% of humans. 100% of kids, if you put them under extreme duress or trauma, will dissociate if it's enough.
Yep.
It's how they survive. If they didn't leave their body, if their soul couldn't leave and go somewhere, they couldn't live at
And
that moment.
I think this is why we find that children have different levels of trauma applied to them, because they know they only have to apply what's required to get that child to dissociate, and then that becomes measurable. Certain children, they'll beat into a bloody pulp on the floor because that's what's required
Yes.
until
Other
they can get you to dissociate. And they have to get you to that point because they need you to forget.
They need you to forget. That's it. And they
So
need you to
it's
talk about it.
prerequisite. You are going to get what it takes to make you dissociate, because everything else involved is required to be forgotten.
100%. And then the evil and depravity of then taking advantage of the split part of the soul that comes forward to save the child, and then they start abusing that part of the person's
Right.
unconsciousness. It's
Right.
just so heinous. It's so
Hmm.
heinous that they've, really refined this, and to think they were this sophisticated when you were a child. It's like, gosh, imagine what they know now today.
Hmm. Yeah. I believe that this level of technique has been around since time immemorial. That, it's not like satanic ritual abuse just showed up on the face of the earth in this last 100 years. I believe what wound up happening is that these were things that were secreted away, and not used as prevalently as they are contemporarily. But what unfortunately occurred is that now we have technology for what used to be techniques. It used to be very one-on-one, that the ritual abuse would happen in close proximity with maybe a small group of handlers and a small group of victims. Now, through the application of technology, they are able to broaden the horizon of the target, and they're just applying these techniques through technology to traumatize millions of people simultaneously to still get the result they know they can manufacture. And they can make people dissociate, they can make people triggerable, they can make people forget that they've been traumatized, they can do more heinous things to people in the community at large by having this applied power now through technology. And I don't know how people can't look around and see that I'm 1,000% correct.
I know, I can't either. You just take the
Yeah.
TV, look at just that simple thing
Right.
that's been
What
around
about
forever.
what about life right now is not traumatic and mind controlling? I
Right.
mean, where do we look to see joy? Where do we look to see freedom?
You have to find it on your own. You're not going to see it if you try to look around for it. It doesn't exist.
Right.
They've taken that from us, and they
Hmm.
shove it in our face that they've taken it from us until we accept that and say, "Oh,
Hmm.
I'm not sovereign anymore." Like on an unconscious level, like we just
Right.
like all of us, so many people have just given up that.
Right. And a lot of people might be listening to this and going, "Oh, wow, Eric, you had a horrible childhood. You didn't have this, you didn't have that." Well, you have a horrible adulthood. You don't have it either anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. Nothing that's going on is normal. It's all controlled, manufactured, and deliberate.
Hmm.
They've done to us, whether
Yeah.
it's on these programs or on a mass scale, like how we were talking about in the beginning.
Hmm.
And so going back to those years in school, so you now are having to practice the discipline aspect of this, your willpower, your sort of strategy mindset of, okay, I'm a disobedient person. I've been trained that way. Like I'm wanting. They've basically conditioned me to fight and to be violent in these times, but I can't do it at school. I have to figure out how I can incorporate this into my life. Were you still going through the Stargate type programs where they were still having you remote view and taking you to classrooms? Were you still being experimented on that level too, sort of like a lab rat-ish type
I was
experimentation?
I was not at
Okay.
that point in time. I believe that aspect of the program ended when I graduated eighth grade. Um, I feel like, again, it's hard to put timetables on some stuff. I do believe there was still the EKG and the EEG measuring going on, but at that point it was sparse. It used to be very regular. I just feel like there might have just been like some follow-up visits in that regard. But the standard, the stuff that was going on in the library, ended in eighth grade.
Okay. And I think maybe what we can do on the next time is dive in deeper to the Navy experiences and then how that led you on the path that you went on as an adult. But what I wanted
Mhm.
to maybe finish with is how did that end up happening in your life where the Navy got introduced to you as an option? Because I don't think that was a coincidence either.
Not a coincidence at all. I would put it this way. I knew my entire life. My father was in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Navy. It was, let's just say, a sailing family. Um, in a way, it was like I always knew I was going to get there eventually. To be honest, it was just a matter of let me see if I can weigh some options. And after high school, I got a job at a local drugstore, which was run by the mob, the Genovese family. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize Genovese drugs is the Genovese family. It's the mafia. It's right in everyone's face. But whatever. So the place that I worked at was a drugstore owned by the Genovese family. Um, and on one particular day, I mean, it was part of my duties to clean out the bottom of the milk case weekly. So you would take all the product out, and then there were these grates that you would pick up, and there's all this muck from all the, from the previous week, and it was nasty. So one particular day, I was just cleaning this up, and I was thinking to myself, I guess I'd been out of high school a few months or so at that point, and I mean, college wasn't, it was just whatever I could figure out in life. I'm done with high school, and now it's reality. What are you going to do, kid? Right? So I'm cleaning out the milk case, and it's heinous. And I remember just thinking to myself, shit, I gotta, I gotta pull the trigger. I certainly can't do this forever. So I think I bagged out of work that day. I think whatever reason, I was like, yeah, I gotta get out of here. I got something going on or something like that. And I contacted one of my friends, and we went and smoked the doob. And I was like, listen, dude, I'm gonna switch gears in life, and I'm gonna go to the Navy recruiter, and I'm gonna sign up for the Navy. And he straight up was like, I'm gonna do that too. And I was like, okay, whatever. So we both went to the Navy recruiter, and it was actually so funny because I mean, like I said, I was stoned. And we went to the recruiting office, and hey, how you doing, sir? I want to join the Navy. And they give you paperwork to fill out. So we're filling it all out, and I go to hand it into the guy, and he starts reading it, and he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. He goes, it says here, he goes, it asks if you've done drugs. And I was like, yeah, I'm stoned right now. Like, you asked if I've done drugs. I'm telling you what I did. Like, I'm an honest person. And he straight up, he just starts ripping up the paperwork, and he's like, you can't write that down. He goes, so here's what we're gonna do. He goes, there's a recruiting office up the road. He goes, just go over there, do the exact same thing that you did here. He goes, but when they ask you if you did drugs, he goes, just say no. And I was like, all right, you know. So I went to the other recruiting office, and I filled out the forms, and I wrote no. And I got in the Navy.
That is hilarious. That's actually a really funny story. I work in the can my full-time job is in the cannabis industry. So I love hearing
Ah,
stories of just how it's been, misunderstood in society and like how far we've come from days
mhm.
like that where it's like, wait, you can't talk about
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. What do you mean? I'm stoned right now, sir. Like, and why shouldn't I be? I'm, I'm 18 and my job sucks.
That's really funny. That's funny too that you literally went then. You didn't wait to like sober up or like to the next day. I was like, let's just go right now. It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Well, again, like you're aware, like there's that misconception. Everybody thinks that if you're smoking weed, you like you're dysfunctional.
Totally, right. Which you
You
can
know,
be, you can get to that point, but
it's possible, but it's not inherent in the
right.
activity. I mean, I've like I don't smoke pot anymore. Wish I could, but I can't because of my current employment situation. But through the years, I assure you, in the plumbing world, odds are if you call a plumber to your house, he's stoned. I'll just put that on the table, right? I literally have had multiple employers, right, where I get hired on, and I work there for a couple of weeks, and they realize this is par for the course in my career, right? They realize I'm very good at what I do. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks in, they have something that they need to do at their house. So they want me to go work in their house because I'm one of their best hands, right? But it never fails because if you own a plumbing company, you're probably a pothead too. So it never failed that all of a sudden one day after work, my boss would call me over and be like, hey, come here. I'm like, yeah, what's going on? And they'd be like, you've been working here a couple of weeks, and you're doing a good job, but let me ask you a question. You smoke pot? And I'd be like, yeah, of course I smoke pot. And they'd be like, oh, it makes you a better plumber, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know it makes you a better plumber. And they're like, okay, cool. So I want you to come by my house tonight because there's something I need you to fix for me. And, in reality, they're going to go home and smoke a lot of weed. So they don't want to have to hide it while I'm at their house fixing their plumbing.
So they have to disclose it to you
So they
so
have
you are comfortable going over and you know what to expect.
exactly. And I do know what to expect. I already know that if I'm going to go to the boss's house and work on his shower, we're going to smoke some of the sickest weed that's available on Long Island.
That's so funny. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
because plumbing company owners can get really good shit.
Oh, I bet. Yes. not to mention, I mean, that is a job I would think that might be a little bit easier to do if you are a little bit under the influence of that, I would think.
There are many times I sat in the back of a van at 2 o'clock in the morning, where there's a problem in the house, and you're like, all right, so the problem in there is I got one of these things and it's broken between this and that. So I need to find one of these to connect to one of these to get to that. And then you'd be like, all right, well, I got one of these, and I got one of these, but I don't have that other thing. So you'd be like, I got an idea. And you just start to work the problem. It makes you creative. And this is where they were right when this says it makes you a better plumber.
Absolutely. I mean, it can make you better at a lot of things, in my opinion, but that's just
Mhm.
me.
Fair enough.
Now, before we start wrapping up, was there any other memories or anything from your formative years, your childhood years that you wanted to talk about today that we didn't get a chance to?
Mm, I guess I would add to the equation in the grand scheme of trying to benefit the children and the parents out there. Um, how do I put it? When I was a child, I would say that I was the youngest of all of the generations. We were in a very German Irish neighborhood. It was not uncommon for people to have 6, 8 children or more. I was what you would say on the bottom rung of the generations that, my friends would have 7 older brothers and sisters and such, right? That all went through the same school. So by the time we showed up there was a known pedophile in the faculty that all of the children knew about and made sure to communicate. You stay away from him. So just as a reminder, these are the things that I knew as a child that every kid knew, but apparently was not discussing with the adults because that's how the bad adults control the good children. Find out who's working in your children's schools. Find out who they avoid. Ask the right questions because they will not bring it up to you. They have been trained and programmed already that you aren't interested and won't listen. Do due diligence. Ask your children who their favorite people are in school. Ask them who they don't like. Find out who they avoid. Start to connect the dots with the other children. Who are the adults in your children's school that every child avoids? And go grab that person by the skull and beat it into the wall until they tell you who else those children are afraid of. That's how we fix this. There are wolves in the hen house, and we need to fix that.
Thank you so much for saying that. It's again going back, I know we talked about it just a little bit in the beginning, but pedophiles and child abusers, they're good at hiding. They will go to school for all those years to become a teacher just to be around a kid. This isn't just people that we see in movies where it's almost, this like homeless looking person that like one time goes and, abuses somebody. Like these are very patient, very charming,
Organized.
very organized, many times very
They
charming.
they have peers that they're working with and they network. They are almost never, like I said before, there are wolves, that's plural. These are not lone wolves in the hen house. These are organized people working together to get your children.
It's terrifying. Yes, and I second that off of everything that I've heard on my podcast very, very randomly. I actually can't even think of a single time off the top of my head where a survivor came on and said, a complete stranger abused me, unless it was somebody part of the program that they were in that they didn't know. It was just somebody that was there
Mhm.
working and facilitating the experimentation or abuse. But it's always, I would say like 100% of the time on my podcast, particularly, it's been
Mhm.
somebody very close to the child, somebody that the child trusted,
Mhm.
loved, somebody that had access to them frequently.
Mhm.
It was not just, some random person off the street who randomly targeted a kid, from
Hmm.
mental instability or whatever it was. Like it was a
Hmm.
sophisticated person, a lot of times somebody very held very highly esteemed in society with a good position of work, with stability that looked like they had a good family, that had a good job.
Hmm.
These aren't, predators aren't the people that we're taught they are. That stranger danger thing, we can throw that garbage out. It's who's the
Right.
closest to your kids and get to know why
Hmm.
and how and what's going on with those people that are around your kids all the time, not the
I
stranger
would
on the street.
I would suggest that the whole stranger danger propaganda was probably manufactured by the people that know that it's the opposite of that to throw everyone off the scent,
Think about that.
right? As
I
if propaganda is a new game, as if counterintelligence is a new game.
I mean, what better way to get parents to look the other way too and to be like, "Oh, we gotta avoid all these strangers, but go to school and we're not gonna
Right.
ask any questions. So you're in good hands there. We know those people. They're not
Mhm.
strangers."
Right. They're priests. They would never hurt someone,
It's your soccer coach. They'll never hurt anybody. It's
right?
your pediatrician. It's your dentist. They have your best interests in mind.
Yeah. And I'm it is what it is, right? Here's another thing that I've learned in my experience from youth into my adulthood. If there's an adult that's associated to children's programs that doesn't have their own children, it's a big red flag. Most adults are not really that much into kids unless you have kids. Be very wary of people involved with children that don't have children of their own. What's their interest?
Good tip there. I didn't even think of that one. Very important. That's actually a really, really good point. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we really like as a society, we have to re-educate ourselves on what abuse looks like. And that's why these testimonies are so important because it displays the type of person that it is. And it's not a person that you can put into a neat box and point them out. It's people of all walks of life, both genders. It's
Mhm.
all different positions. It's all different classes, different races, different everything, you
Yeah,
know?
male and female across the spectrum, up and down for the directions of, men will abuse little girls, men will abuse little boys, women will abuse little girls, women will abuse little boys. I've through conversations been shocked. I didn't know how many adult women were abusing young girls sexually. That's new on my radar too. I hadn't considered that. I fell subject to the conditioning that everybody else believes is that you have to watch little girls against adult men because that's where sexual abuse occurs. And no, it is in every direction across the board.
100%. You're absolutely right about that. Eric, we're better off for having you and for your disclosures. And I know that this isn't easy to talk about. It's really traumatizing. I know that you don't talk about it very much. And, it's really sad that more people don't inquire about this part of your life because this can save lives, knowing how this is happening and understanding how it happens and where it's at. And your testimony displays a lot of that and all the different ways that our children are being targeted, the ways that they're being accessed and the type of person that is perpetuating this perpetration on kids, and I know that we still have a lot to tap into with your story and that it didn't just end after you graduated and, after you left the Stargate program, it did continue, even if it was in a different way. And I'm sure even today you're targeted and still go through things. So I know we still have a lot to talk about, and I'm so excited that you're willing to do a part two with me, and I appreciate you spending this extra time today. Let's remind people of your website, and anything else that you want to share about things that you're working on or ways that people can help you or help support you.
You got it. First things first, I want to thank you for providing a comfortable environment to engage such challenging topics. I was very impressed by your portfolio, so to say, of all the other conversations that you had. So thank you. In regards to supporting what I'm doing, um, deciphering.tv. If people can go there and share the information, I have the archives section where I have put out documentation to verify some of my experiences. I have interviews with other fine folk like Emma who are trying to connect the dots. The best way you can assist the truth movement right now is to separate yourself from purely speculative, unsubstantiated information and try to assist the community in accessing what I would call verifiable, actionable intelligence. Please take a look at the website, sign up, grab a link, share it somewhere where you think people might enjoy engaging the information, and also share the information somewhere where you might think you might bother people by presenting this information. This is what we really need to do right now is stir things up, break out of the echo chambers of agreeing with everything and keeping everything all happy and love and light. Those times are over. And it's time to fight for the truth. It's time to fight for the children. I mean, come on, folks. If we can't get behind that we have to make the world a better place for our kids, put some effort in. We can do this.
Amen to that. We need more courage. And like you said, people not afraid to be uncomfortable. And it's a learning curve. It goes against how we're raised. We're raised to be very polite and to not talk over authorities, to not step out of line, to not mess up. And it's really opposite of what we should be doing. And because of that lack of assertion in having courage to be bold with the truth and to not be nice, and of course you want to be nice, but I mean,
Mhm.
like you said, just sort of this like fake Instagram personas that so many of us have online, where we only show up and talk about these things that make us look like we're perfect. We're afraid to like ripple the lake and to, cause a ripple in the ocean and to, cause a fire. And like those are the things that we should be doing, because everybody has sat back in history. Not everybody. There's obviously been people that have stood up, but as a society, we really lacked the courage to come together and stop the things that we know are wrong. And we'll complain about it all day, but really all that we need to do, we could take this all out in 5 minutes. If every single person came together, this could be over right now. We could put all these people away. We could figure out who all the people are perpetuating this. We could figure out the truth and we could make a change. It's just we're taught, and it's just drilled into our head and programmed into us that we need to obey and sit back and not do the things that we actually should be.
Yep.
I really appreciate your warrior spirit, Eric, and for all the documentation and the work that you have put into this amazing website that you have given us. And you have a forum, you said too.
There is a forum there as well, so people can engage, find that they have peers. This is all relatively new for being out in the public. But yes, I absolutely would suggest that people start to engage and connect and share their information. There is a forum. Throw some questions on there. Find out that there are peers, and we the people for the people can conquer all enemies.
We can, and this is right on his website, right on the homepage. Just scroll down and you can just click a button that says get access to join the forum. The one thing that the news media and that our enemy does better than us is their organization. When they set their mind to something, they all come together and make it happen. And we're so scattered and divided. And like Eric said, we need to come together and put all that aside and come together to expose what they're doing to kids, because it's really the root. Like how Eric was saying earlier, so many other things, so many other crimes would fall apart if we could expose what's happening to kids and put a stop to it. It all revolves around behavior modification programs and child abuse. Everything does. That's the one string that they don't want us to pull. And if we all come together and Eric's providing us a way to do that, that's what we should be doing, is doing exactly what the mainstream media does, disseminating information together, supporting these people that are coming forward and giving them an army, just like how we do for our favorite celebrities. We can pack 50,000 people into an arena, but a whistleblower gets one follower, and it's like we need to do the same things that we do for the people we're conditioned to idolize. Like we have to put some of that effort into protecting whistleblowers and survivors, and putting that same support that we put to our favorite celebrities and those types of people into the people coming forward to tell the truth about what's going on in our world. We have to have the courage to be unpopular and to be disliked even, and if we come together, we're not alone. and we can do it together and make what's taboo and conspiracy, we can make it mainstream and make it truth. It just requires a certain amount of people to get behind it. And I know that those people are there. Just a lot of people are very scared to do it, So I commend you, Eric, for being on the front lines of this. I know it's not easy. Like I said, I don't know much about what you go through as far as personal attacks and things like that, but I'm sure you have your fair share of people who aren't happy with what you're doing. And I really appreciate you continuing to go on and creating all of these ways that we can connect and ways that we can learn. So I will have this website in the show notes, you guys, as well as all of my links also. The best things that you guys can do, I always get asked, how do I support these people that you have on your show? Go support their businesses directly, support their websites, their books, their shows that they do, share their content, engage with them. If the enemy knows that we're backing people and that we're coming together, that's what they fear the most, and it's the easiest thing that we can do. It's free, so I really encourage you guys to take advantage of Eric's website and what he's done. And if you're a creator like me who is struggling to find a home to put your content, Eric has a contact button up in the top right of his menu. Please contact him and reach out. He's willing to host you on his space and give you a home, which is extremely generous of him. And I think if enough creators reach out and do this, we can create kind of a little mainstream hub where it's kind of a go-to. People can come to one place and find all the creators who are being censored elsewhere, who are telling the truth. So I really encourage you guys to reach out, or if you guys want to reach out and help somehow, if you guys have a different way that you guys can help support Eric's mission, please reach out. I would really love that if you guys could offer any support. So Eric, thank you again so much for coming on today. It's an honor getting to have this conversation with you and finally getting to hear this part of your testimony that, other people haven't really ventured down learning about you.
Thank you very much, Emma, for your time and interest. And I really look forward to round 2 on this conversation.
I do too. And I encourage you guys to go watch Eric's other interviews that he's done and see how the hosts are engaging with him. It's kind of interesting seeing the sort of lack of engagement with wanting to talk about Stargate other than just kind of glossing over it. I noticed that right away, and I think a lot of you guys would too. So learn about his story, go follow him, support him. I'll have all my links in the show notes also, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Bless you all, and we will see you next time.